So we're entitling this seminar All Quiet in the Western Church. And that's because it's a question. Are we about to go all quiet in the Western Church? This brings me to the issue of entropy. Because entropy is the whole reason I'm talking about this. Years ago, Bill Hybels, the pastor of Willow Creek Community Church, defined leaders partially as people who could smell entropy before other people could. And I think that's a pretty good definition. That idea of seeing when things are breaking up, dissipating, when they're unraveling. That leaders can kind of intuitively see that before other people see it. And in my own life, I have found that God has given me the ability sometimes to see entropy, and I have seen this particularly in the Western Church. This may have started for me back in 1985. Laurel and I had a fellowship, a preaching fellowship, at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And so we got a year abroad where we kind of got to see front row seats of what it looks like when the church disappears. I'd known from church history that 18th and even 19th century that the center of Western Christianity was rooted really there in Great Britain, and in fact much of it at the University of Edinburgh. So being there for a year and recognizing the death of the church there caused me to realize this is like seeing an atomic explosion, like spiritually, like the whole place had been taken out, like it had been blown up. And that's when I began to smell entropy. I remember at the time thinking, thank goodness that's not us here in the American church. Thank goodness we're in pretty good shape compared to the British church. But now, over the years, I've begun to think maybe this is a preview of coming attractions. Maybe God allowed me to see that because I'm about to watch something similar occur here in America, since we are based on the same European or Western church model. Well, that got worse for me in my church, Heartland Community Church. I planted in 1986. We were trying to figure out how to do church for unchurched people, and God gave us the grace to be somewhat effective at that, and we were beginning to see unchurched people would show up. If church seemed relevant and not so boring to them, they were open to listening to the claims about Jesus. But I began to notice something odd in my church. I began to notice that we were pretty good at attracting crowds, but increasingly I started noting we weren't so good at making disciples. We had a lot of people who didn't do church before that started doing church, but not necessarily. We had some, but not necessarily a lot of people who are interested in being disciples of Jesus. And that was concerning to me. About halfway through my tenure at Heartland, I started an alternative seminary called MAP, which stands for Ministry Apprenticeship Program. And I also began to smell entropy in MAP. One of the things I would do with students was to send them off on what we'd call flash trips to see some of the amazing mega churches of the day. And when we began doing that at the end of the 80s and the early 90s, we'd send students up to Willow Creek or to Saddleback, and they would come back and they would just be like, wow, 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 wow. When can we get a food court? When can we have a cool PA system? They were impressed. They were wowed by the excellence factor there. And they should have been. But then I began to notice something strange happening. Somewhere towards the end of the 90s, I noticed the reaction of my students was very different when they went to Willow Creek. They would come back and say, wow, but totally different kind of wow. It wasn't like, wow. It would be like, wow, wow. They spent an awful lot of money on that PA system. And I don't know that they're getting those kind of results. And wow, they're big. They're enormous. You know, I just felt like a speck in the universe. Well, I noticed that something was changing. Philosophers sometimes call this postmodernism, where the next generation is not wowed by the things the boomers were wowed. We thought bigger was better, and so seeing a mega church and amazing numbers of people come to it, for us was a wow factor. But Postmoderns began saying, yeah, that seems so impersonal, so selfish, so much spending the money on themselves, that they began to be, in fact, at times even disgusted by it. I remember taking my sons, when a couple of them were in high school and some of their friends, to a local megachurch where my wife had to drop off some papers at the church. And while she was in there, these kids, I would consider nominal Christians, would say to me, hey, is there any way we could drive off the parking lot? And I'd be like, yeah, I don't understand. Why? And they'd say, well, because we don't want to be here. I go, what do you mean you don't want to be here? And they'd say, well, look around. Everything here, it's got like a name on it. It's like dedicated to some rich guy who gave money for it. We're not comfortable here. And again, at the time, I remember thinking, something's changing. Something's changing. Last story I want to tell is about a dream I had. This is, I can't even remember, 3 or 4 years ago. God was beginning to shift my paradigm in terms of what church was, and I was increasingly becoming aware of the leak in the Western church, the entropy of the Western church. And I had a dream, and I don't know the details. You know how hard it is to remember the details of your dream. It's gotten even worse since I saw Leonardo DiCaprio's movie Inception. I'm like, okay, I don't know how to tell you what really happened, but here's my memory of what happened in the dream. In the dream, way in the future, I'm watching an elderly seminary professor, look like Colonel Sanders. He's lecturing on the death of the church at the end of the 20th century. This is well into the future. I don't know how far. But I just remember him talking about this is when the church in America really disappeared. It just died out. Again, I don't remember the details, but I do remember in the dream, I shouted, "Not on my watch." And I ran across the room and tackled the man. I don't know if I was like a ghost, like in a Christmas Carol, and nobody else could see me. But I woke up someone here, and all I could remember is that I'd had this wild dream about feeling guilty that the church had died during the period of time that I was supposed to be a leader in the church. And that's kind of become a motto for me. Not on my watch. There's entropy, but I don't want it to completely unravel on my watch. Turn in your Bible to Matthew chapter 9, verse 16 and 17, because Jesus talks about a principle here that I think is relevant to this issue. Here's what he says. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, and it will make the tear worse. Neither do men pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved. Now, that's kind of the point here. Jesus is saying, guys, I know I don't do ministry the way you and the synagogue system do it. But that's a wineskin. And old wineskins burst. The wine of the gospel cannot be contained by any structure, any model, any approach to doing it. It'll always burst. And we know this from church history. We can go back and look at the Wesleyan revivals in Great Britain in the 18th century, and we know eventually they burst. What initially was used to carry the wine of the gospel powerfully into a culture eventually got crusty and old and start bursting leaks. And Jesus says that's the nature of things. Wineskins break. They leak. But the wine remains the same. Now, I know today one of the problems we have is that we've got some young leaders out there who are thinking, maybe if we update and tweak the wine, maybe Oprah will end up liking it. Maybe if we'll just shift a few things and massage the gospel a little bit, maybe we'll end up with wine that our culture likes. Now, I'm personally not for that. I think that's a recipe for disaster. I don't think the issue here is the wine of the gospel. It transcends all cultures, all time periods. I think the issue is the wineskin. and I believe those wineskins are leaking, and that's really what we're going to investigate in this seminar. Is the Western Church wineskin leaking, and what do we do about it?